The man accused of charging through security and opening fire at the White House Correspondents' dinner is set to appear in court for his arraignment in the coming hours. 31-year-old Cole Tomas Allen, a part-time teacher from California. He's facing federal firearm and assault charges. You see him here in this photo. We have learned that the suspect purchased 2 firearms legally in recent years. You're looking at one of them, a shotgun. And just before the attack, he allegedly sent a note to family members expressing political anger and plans to target members of the administration. Well, he wrote in that note, quote, "I don't expect forgiveness."
We did obtain this so-called manifesto. That is what agents and administration officials are referring to, these writings from the suspect. We are told that he sent this manifesto to his family members roughly 10 minutes before the incident occurred. But these officials also told me that the family members did not see this until after the incident, and that's when they reported it to local authorities. One thing is clear, though, in these writings, this suspect did set out to harm cabinet officials in Trump's cabinet. In fact, this line in particular, it says, administration officials, they are targets prioritized from highest ranking to lowest. And then he goes into saying that he's not going to be targeting law enforcement. Of course, we know he did end up exchanging fire with one of those agents who, of course, thankfully was wearing protective gear and is expected to be all right.
So joining me now is CNN senior law enforcement analyst Andrew McCabe. So, Andy, to start, can you talk about the value of a manifesto? I have to admit, when there are mass shootings, we tend not to quote from them. What's going to be significant in this?
Yeah, Audie, so the primary thing that investigators are looking for right off the bat is to make sure that there's no evidence of additional plotting. Are there other people connected to this person who might be like-minded, who are thinking about doing the same thing, or who may have helped him execute his plan? And so the manifesto can be enormously helpful with that. Once you've resolved that question in your mind, you're fairly confident that there's no one else involved here, there's still a real a high priority on mining as much intelligence as you possibly can about why this person did what they did. And let's be clear, investigators are collecting evidence to be able to help prove the prosecution. That's going on in one channel, but alongside that is a broader scope of intelligence that you're looking for to answer that why question. And the reason is, the more we learn about why people resort to political violence or arm themselves with weapons and go into events like this, the better we can get at spotting threats and mitigating these sort of threats before they happen. So it's a constant thing that law enforcement is always doing.
And sadly, something that's not so unusual, he actually sent his messages to his brother, to family members. They actually contacted the police department, I think it was in New London, Connecticut, to talk about their concern. Can you talk about what that means? Like, is the family going to be part of this investigation now? And how can families be helpful in these incidents?
There's no question that they will approach each one of these family members, those who receive the manifestos and possibly others, and to request that they sit down and subject themselves to interviews. Not anything that could result in them getting in trouble. That's not the focus here. But you want to really know about that communication, about how it was received, and really about the relationship preceding that communication. How did we get to this point? The family members can be of enormous significance to an investigation. Probably the most famous example of that is, of course, the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, who wrote that monstrous manifesto that he sent to the New York Times and the Washington Post, and which was ultimately identified by his brother, his family member, who was able to kind of unravel the mystery of who the Unabomber was for us. That's obviously not the situation here, but nevertheless, getting to that, answering that question of why, those family members could be really helpful in that.
Before I let you go, can you tell us what the next steps are? Does he appear in court? Like, what happens?
Yeah, so he'll appear in court today. He'll be arraigned or officially charged in public with the offenses. We should hear some additional details from the prosecutors about what's been uncovered in the investigation so far. I'm quite confident he'll be detained. He'll be held in jail pending the remainder of the investigation and his prosecution. And ultimately, if he decides to contest these charges, he'll go to trial. That wouldn't happen for quite some time. Although I should also add, I expect these charges to be added to with additional charges as the investigation continues.
Authorities have the writings from the suspect. From a national security standpoint, and for projecting forward rather than looking backward, what do you do with those writings now?
So it gives us obviously a sense of motive that he was getting more interested in left-wing causes, began to hate Donald Trump and the administration. I think for purposes of radicalization and political violence, what we want to know, or what's scary about this, is the sort of what we call the short runway of radicalization, which is essentially these things are happening so fast now. His family says he's not really engaged. He doesn't have a criminal record. And then, very quickly, he becomes the person who tries to assassinate the president. That's a challenge for law enforcement, and it means families, as we might have seen this family do, must take it very seriously and try to intervene.
What do you make of the man's writings that he sent to family just before the attack?
Well, look, you and I have covered so many acts of violence where there is often a lingering question about what was a motive. And sometimes that's laborious work for law enforcement to try to dig into that. You take, for example, the attempted assassination against President Trump last year in Pennsylvania. To this day, there are still major questions about the motive, very mysterious. Yeah. This is not that, Kate. I mean, everything that we're learning about this person from his own purported writings, he essentially lays out what the motive is. That's his deep animus for the president, for members of the Trump administration. He goes in this long kind of delusional ranting manifesto, which I won't get into to amplify, but he basically has a target list. And he goes so far as to think, okay, people are going to criticize me for doing certain things. Here's my rebuttal to each of those points. And this is what FBI profilers typically call the typical grievance collector, someone who appears that they're so motivated by grievances that they then decide to act on violence. That manifesto will certainly be critical evidence in his prosecution.
Joining us now, CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig. Ellie, look, we've got this arraignment today. This is a procedure that every suspect goes through if they have been jailed and are facing potential trial. What do we expect today?
So first of all, we're not going to actually see anything, you and me and the media and the public, because this is federal court. No cameras in the courtroom, not even a live audio feed, but we will have our reporters there so people will know what's going on. This defendant will be advised of the charges against him. He will enter a plea, a not guilty plea, I'm sure. The judge will make sure he has a lawyer. If he has one he's paying, that's fine. If not, the court will appoint one for him. The judge will consider the issue of bail, which he will not get. He's going to be detained pending trial or pending the outcome of the case. And then the judge will turn potentially to scheduling issues. How quickly is this going to move? When does the government have to turn over its evidence, what we call discovery? How long do the parties have for motions? And maybe set a trial date. Usually you won't see a trial date set in an initial appearance like today, but it'll give us some sense of how fast a pace this case is on. All
right. Look, police are talking about these writings that they've found that they've linked to the suspect. And in one of them, they say he wrote, "Let me start off by apologizing to everyone whose trust I abused." It does sound very much like a mea culpa. So I guess the question is, if he wanted to get a plea deal, if he decides, you know what, I don't need to go through this whole trial. I was a person that was responsible for this. There's video of me. There's pictures of me. If he wanted a plea deal, do you think one would be offered him?
You know, the vast majority of federal cases, over 95%, do end up in guilty pleas as opposed to trial. That said, in this case, if I'm going back into the prosecutor's seat here, I'm not giving this guy any offer whatsoever. I do not expect this Justice Department or this U.S. Attorney in D.C., rightly, I do not expect them to give him any offer of leniency. The offer will be, you can just plead and get a life sentence. Now, he may make a strategic decision. Well, let me plead guilty and sort of throw myself at the mercy of the judge. The fact that I've accepted responsibility, if he does, may give the judge some reason to sentence somewhat lower. So you could see what we would call, what I would consider a one-sided plea, where the defendant goes in, prosecutor doesn't have an agreement, but the defendant just says, "Judge, I'm guilty. I'm at your will."
All right, we'll have to see what happens during this arraignment. Look, the writings also show that this was politically based. Yep. And if those writings are indeed his, when you look at that, could there be any additional charges in this case?
The writings are crucial evidence. First of all, it confirms beyond any question it is him. It confirms that he planned this, that this was intentional. And it could well support additional charges. He's currently charged with using a firearm in the course of a crime of violence and with assault on a federal official. If you're a prosecutor and you want to add an attempted assassination charge, and the writings say, this is my goal, I'm trying to kill the president, the vice president, others, that would be the basis for an attempted assassination charge. And I do expect prosecutors will add charges, maybe as soon as today, maybe within the coming days. And given what we know about the writings, I do expect there to be attempted assassination charges added to this case.
Yeah, we